My fiancée was playing me by cheating on me on her business trips, so I got my revenge. DB was cheating on me when we were supposed to be getting married. As a person who prides myself in perfection, I had never imagined finding myself in this situation. She had been sharing her bed with other men while I was preparing my mind for a wedding. The discovering that my wife-to-be of 6 months was cheating on me had almost weighed me down. But luckily for me, I wasn't a fool that believed in love, and I saw women for what they always were: liars. However, I had thought that I had everything about this woman figured out. Heck, that's why I had proposed. Not because of love or anything weird like emotions. I had also thought I had absolute control when it came to my relationship with her. But she goes and proves me right. I say right because I have never been wrong. I guess I could say I always expected this. Expected there to be a hitch in my relationship with women. Trust me, it began from when I was little. I was made to never rely on a woman's word because, as I said before, they were all liars. I had only decided to marry my fiancée because she seemed a tad bit different from the rest. Emphasis on tad bit. And I really thought she couldn't get the best of me. I should have trusted my instincts. Women were one and truly the same, and my friends had laughed their asses off when I had told them of my problem. So I have come to you Redditors for a solution. My wife-to-be was a hardcore career woman, a seasoned businesswoman whose 80% of her business transactions involved traveling and meeting people from all walks of life. This could sometimes take the whole weekdays, leaving her with only weekends for other things. I had advised her shortly after I had proposed to stop her work, as I was well-to-do and could take care of her. This she had strongly refused, always claiming to be an independent lady. Mind you, that's not how I met her when we started dating. I hate not being in control, and I told her to quit, but now I see the reason why she had refused to leave her job. That's because she was sharing another man's bed under the pretext of traveling for business. I had no idea how I had never looked into whatever she was doing. I had overlooked because I had thought everything was going well. Our wedding plans were already underway, and she goes ahead to do that. Can you imagine the audacity of women? They're all the same, professing their undying love and devotion and accepting your ring 1 minute, then sharing another man's bed the next. Just like I had said earlier, weekends are the only time available for us to see and continue our wedding plans. She had accepted her job once we had started discussing about getting married. I hadn't thought much of a to-be wedded couple not spending time together. I mean, we had the rest of our lives to spend together, so I hadn't protested her job at first. But when it became something she carried on her head always, I began to complain. I am a man, of course. I have needs. Needs she was supposed to be satisfying, but she had taken it upon herself to become Forbes' most independent fiancée, coming up with excuses left and right. Stupid excuses now that I think about them. Terribly stupid excuses that I should have seen right through. When did I begin to notice something was off about her attitude? The day we were supposed to go cake tasting, and then she called to say she won't be able to make it back from wherever her work had taken her. This woman had slied me, and she had sounded breathless while at it, like she had just finished tumbling in the sheets or she was getting ready to begin. And I had taken it at that moment. That's what irks me. I hadn't demanded that she come home immediately. I had just said okay and thought of way to reschedule cake tasting. It's like our positions had switched, and I was the one with the apron around my neck, baking cookies and rescheduling cake tasting. She was undermining my mojo. Well, I wouldn't have even come to this realization that something was off if not for the signs, the various signs. After that incident, I began to take note of the signs, although not consciously, but at the back of my head. I was storing them there. We always spent most weekends together when she was done traveling around the world. On some days, it seemed like her facade would slip and she'll start giving me attitude. From talking back at me to replying me under her breath to thinking she ought to have a say in everything. It was like she was changing overnight and her true colors were beginning to show. It seemed the man she was sharing her bed with was giving her some courage. If not for the signs, I would have never given it a place in my heart to suspect that my wife-to-be was cheating on me. So I decided to look into it. But before I go into that, let me tell you a little bit of myself and how I had met my fiancée and got up to the stage of proposing. My name is Steve. I am 31 years old, 6 foot 5 inches tall, heavily built and athletic, handsome, and easily attract the opposite sex. I'm not bragging, this is just who I am. And it takes an assertive man, someone who knows who they are and what they want, to be able to conquer the world. I hold shares with top IT company in the States, and I'm building a startup. My life may sound novel and one for the books, but I'm simply an ambitious and confident man. My fiance's name is Nuella, and she's 28 years old. I met my wife to be at a mutual friend's get-together party. I'll say what had attracted me to her was that out of the 10 pretty women that were at the party, she was among the 3 that didn't flaunt herself in front of me. Given that the other 2 were already married, she was the only one that didn't light up like she had seen a money bag when she saw me. And the fact that she was also beautiful too. Those were the things that drew me to her. She ticked all the boxes of a beautiful woman. Hair, eyes, chin, stature, and she carried herself with this elegant grace. She was the price at the party, and she knew it. This is why I and the other men at the party were attracted to her, but like attracts like, and she found her way to me. After that, we began to see more of each other at various events. We ran in the same groups, it had seemed. She was friends with my friends, so of course my friends matched us. Every party I was invited to, she was somehow there. And every party she was invited to, my friends made sure I was there too. I got to know she was in her 3rd year in college at Florida State University studying business administration. So not only was she pretty, she was also smart and respectful of my every decision during the few times we hung out. At the time, she was 24 and I was 27, and not getting any younger according to my mother, who had been hassling me at that time to enter a serious relationship. Well, that's how I and Nuella started dating. During our dating days, we were known as the power couple among our friends. I hadn't began dating my fiancée because of love, and she knew. That's why we made the power couple. There wasn't some sappy emotion getting in the way of our goals. I wanted a relationship and could provide. She also wanted a relationship and needed someone that could provide. The cherry on top? She was obedient and never questioned my decisions. So I made sure she was well cared for while we were dating. During her graduation 2 years later, I attended alongside her parents, and that's when I proposed. While we were having dinner at my home in front of her family and our mutual friends, I popped out a ring. No, I didn't kneel because that would have been degrading of my character, but I asked in the most polite manner. Her parents were there after all. I didn't want them to think their daughter would be marrying someone who couldn't care for her. Most of my friends had thought I had gone and fallen in love. They had termed it the unemotional Steve gains his first emotion, but they didn't know I wasn't proposing out of love, but out of a sense of responsibility for my family. I hadn't really cared for the emotion love. I still don't, by the way. Imagine what state I would have been in if I had been in love and she cheated on me. Lol, I would probably have keeled over like a weak man with a 70-plus heart. Well, after I had proposed, that's when my fiancée went and accepted the job offer that set about this chain of terrible events. The day she had accepted the job, she had seemed so pleased and couldn't wait to start despite my warnings about her discarding the job. According to her, the job was the first real thing she had ever gotten from her hard work and sweat, and she would just test the waters with it. As someone who loves control, I should probably have dismissed any talks of her accepting the job then and there, but she was a person and had the right to choose for herself, so I let her. I thought that after testing the waters and seeing how harsh the employment world was, she would quit after 2 weeks. But it seemed she was enjoying her freedom even more because after 6 months of testing the waters, she had the audacity to test other men in her bed. The little witch. Enough of the background story and on to how I had caught my fiancée cheating on me on one of her business trips. I hate being played for a fool, but my fiancée played me like a violin expert. Like I had told you all earlier, I began noticing some signs that something was off. The prolonged work trips, the distancing, the attitude, everything was as clear as daylight. So like I said, I had to look into it to see if it was just me being overbearing. She was slowly turning me into a nagging person. Luckily, I came across an old college friend of mine. We used to see each other in the library almost at the same time, so from there we had become study buddies, although we didn't have the same majors. Anyway, we had lost contact since we had graduated, and I just happened to bump into him during one of my stops at Starbucks to get a coffee. Turned out he was a private investigator now, and I teased about our college days. We began meeting up often, and I thought that maybe he could help me with my problems. I told him about my concerns about my fiancée and told him all about how her business trips were becoming suspicious. He gave me a simple test to carry out on her anytime I had the opportunity to do so. The opportunity to test out what he had told me came about a month later. During one of the weekends my fiancée deemed it fit to come back from her business trips, the test naturally took place even without my planning it. She had left her handset in the sitting room when it rang. I wanted to get her the device when she appeared from the door, and with the phone in my hand told me that I had no right to sneak through her things and what had happened to her privacy. This was someone I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks. My fiancé had the audacity to say I was doing too much in our relationship. This was also the same person who always agreed to everything I do and respected my decisions. In her own words, my domineering control was beginning to get to her in our relationship, and it was becoming annoying. She even threatened to take a walk out of the marriage if I continued to behave like that and literally stomped out of the room. I mean, she had stomped her feet out of the room in a tantrum like a toddler, just because I had wanted to hand over her phone that was ringing. I hadn't even gotten a look at who was calling because she had snatched it out of my hands like a guilty witch. To say that I was shocked stupid by my fiancé's outburst would be stating the obvious. In fact, I was dazed and left at a loss for words. Even now, as I recall the events, I can still feel the shock traveling up my spine. For the first time in my life since I had become old enough to know right from wrong, a woman had gotten the best of me. Do you know what was even worse? She claimed I had behaved weirdly, and as a result decided to stay away for a week. She stayed away from me for a week. No calls, no texts, not even a bird with a note. It was in that week, as I replayed the events that had led up to it, to come to the conclusion that she was cheating on me. It was as obvious as a slap on my cheek. And that's how I had felt. Like I had been slapped. I just had to prove that she was cheating. The only way I could do that and be sure was to enlist the help of someone I trusted, and who better than the person who had made me see clearly. I couldn't trust my other friends with this news because they all probably thought I was happily in love. Heck, my wedding was supposedly to be in 2 weeks. Well, there wasn't going to be a wedding after all. I called my old college friend and we met up at our usual spot. Then I told him all the events that had happened, from how the phone test's opportunity had fallen into my lap and the reactions I got from my cheating fiancée after. I even told him how she didn't even speak to me for a whole week because of that. That was how I hired my friend to trail my fiancée on her business trip a week before our supposed wedding week. Of course, she didn't know there wasn't going to be any wedding longer, although I'm sure she was hoping on that. How could someone cut off a person they were supposed to be getting married to for a whole week before the wedding? How could someone even be okay with going away for week-long trips when she was about to get married? Well, I finally knew the answers. She was okay with it because whoever she was, Gudasi was worth it, and I was just a worthless piece of trash who gave her a ring on her finger. At the end of the week, it was established beyond all doubt that my fiancé was cheating on me. And do you all want to guess with who? I couldn't believe it myself when I was told. It turned out she was having all those weekdays and weekend trysts with her first love, whom she happened to meet in another town during one of her numerous travels. According to my PI friend, my fiancé had a lover right from her college days before we started dating. At least it hadn't been right underneath my nose. That would have made me more madder than I already was. My PI friend dropped evidence to attest to my wife to B's movement with her lover that included pictures of them in romantic outing in a beach, flocking together in hotels. My friend even pulled evidence of extracted text and video messages between my cheating fiancé and her lover in the past 3 months. The text that she had been so jumpy for me to see was right on my fingertips, and my anger was hot enough to prepare popcorn. To say I was beyond livid was an understatement. I hated being played above anything else, and she had the audacity to pretend. Growing up with 4 brothers was a big eye-opener to me. As young boys, no day passes without competitions amongst us in trying to prove who is more masculine. This continued on, and as a result grew into a competition will be more attractive to the opposite sex. One constant and recurring factor then was that I always beat them all. I could never be played. I prided myself in always being ahead of my peers, and now a woman had managed to play me. My fiancée was the only woman who I had allowed close to my heart. I didn't trust women in general, as I had stated earlier, and now I had finally let someone in, and she goes ahead to play me like a toy. One thing was for certain: she wasn't going to get away with it. I wasn't going to sit still and watch her play me for a fool. This was what she was going to continue with when we got married, or it seemed she was planning to jilt me at the altar because I couldn't even begin to understand how she planned on continuing her charade and how long she planned to continue it. Well, one thing was for certain, I was still going to go ahead with the wedding. Everything was already in place, the cake, the food, the venue. Stopping the wedding now would be an embarrassment to my name, and the person I wanted to shame was my cheating fiancé. And besides, I hated to waste money. Our wedding day came and I confirmed that my fiancé didn't plan to jilt me at the altar. In fact, she had seemed excited for the wedding if the events of the past week were anything to judge by. She had come home and began to act all loving and sweet, agreeing with everything I said, doing her wifely duties. She had even gotten me a gift to celebrate our coming nuptials. Lol. If only she knew what was coming to her. There would be no wedding. I was going to make sure that she would regret ever deciding to cheat on me. The priest began to recite the vows and asked my fiancée to repeat after him. She happily said her vows, even having the mind to look me in the eye with emotion and say how much she loved me and how she couldn't wait to spend the rest of her life with me. All lies. The way she lied so perfectly well was something that colleges needed to put on as one of the courses to be studied. So smooth with no hitch or even loss of eye contact. When it came to my turn, I kept silent as the priest began to recite the vows and the murmurs began immediately. You all should have seen as the color bleached from my fiancé's face. She had turned ghost white behind pounds of makeup that had been caked into her face. The priest began the vows again, his face confused, and I still kept silent. When the priest stopped trying, I took the mic from him and announced that there will be no wedding, but my guests were free to enjoy the food and the premium entertainment in the reception hall. It was comical watching the look on my cheating fiancé's face. The real disgrace hadn't even begun. I scanned through the crowd, and as expected, she dared invite her lover to come be witness her wedding. Well, less work for me trying to find the man. I walked away with my fiancé standing at the altar and left. Update 2. Hi Redditors. I know most of you have been wondering what happened next after I found out my fiancé was cheating on me and left her at the altar and if she had tried to get in contact with me. A lot of you were probably wondering if I had confronted her or what I had done. This is a follow-up update on my experience with my cheating fiancé. After I jilted her at the altar with no reason, I had blocked her and every of my friend and went about my business for a year. I guess you could say I gave her breathing space to forget about me. But I didn't forget about her. I had a lot in store for her. I still hadn't planned on how I would play like she had tried to play during the first 3 months of my hiatus from my cheating fiancé. However, it had come to me as a notification for her birthday popped up on my phone screen. I was going to play her big time. Thanks to my friend, I still kept tabs on my ex-fiancé and her whereabouts and doings. She was no longer traveling the world like she was doing when we were about to get married, and there was no sign of her first lover in sight. It seemed he had also jilted her as I did. Smart man. Losing credibility in front of another man over a woman was a foolish move. Men ruled the world, not women. And I believed he had also been played too, if I recall the look on his face at the wedding. He looked like he couldn't believe his love was getting married. She had played the two of us, and she was definitely going to get what was coming for her. First up was her job. My friend had related to me that she had lost her job. I might have had something to do with that. It was just a simple submission of evidence of her neglecting her work duties and frolicking with her lover. I didn't know if that was all that it took for them to fire her from her job, but it served the purpose. She still got fired. It was, however, just the tip of the iceberg. I had planned on isolating her from her close friends and family by showing them the two-timer that she was. It just irks me that I hadn't noticed it all those times. Well, while I thought of my plan to humiliate her, I froze every access she had to my accounts. With no job, she had probably thought there was still hope with her having access to my credit cards. Lol. Not on my watch. I was going to strip away every bit of control she had. She was going to feel humiliated. Like I said earlier, the plan came to me when I got a notification of her birthday. By this time, she had already lost her job and didn't have any access to my accounts. This was the time where she'll need someone to be by her side. And it struck me. What if I become that person? And I did. I opened up new social media accounts and sent her friend requests on each one. When she had accepted my friend request, I sent her a text that said I wanted to get to know her, and that's how we started talking. However, she didn't know it was I she was talking to. My username was David, and I was from up north on my profile. I was a middle-aged banker who was looking to have new friend. So she thought she was talking to a David, and she fell for it. As predicted. We continued chatting over the phone over the course of the year, and during one of those times I decided to drop a bomb question and ask if she had been married before. And I'm sure you've already guessed her answer to that question. Once a liar, always a liar. I had even made the question specific in case she tried to twist it. I had asked if she had been nearly married or even had a boyfriend. But my gullible ex-fiancée had lied her head off that she hadn't dated since she left college. Lol. I guess I was that quick to be forgotten. But she won't forget me for long. She would remember me soon enough. During the course of our chat, my ex-fiancée went ahead and fell in love. According to her, she had been so lonely when I had come into her life, and I knew how to treat a woman properly. In my head, she was spilling a whole lot of trash. Trash talk, because I knew the next opportunity she saw, she was going to find a way to cheat. There was a reason why I never trusted women. Even my own mother lied. I decided to play along and have fun at her expense. Our year was almost up and I needed a way to test if she was being truthful. Lol, even relating the word to anything my ex-fiancée made me want to hurl. She wasn't going to change, but I had to test her before making my plan complete. I know you all on this platform would think I'm taking it too far with her, that since I've ghosted her, I should probably move on with my life. But if I do that, my ex-fiancée was probably going to do the same thing to the next unsuspecting man that comes her way. She wasn't going to learn without a lesson being taught, and I couldn't let her go after she had taken me for granted. That wasn't going to happen. I didn't want the next person to have to plan out a revenge that I could have gotten to. Well, I wasn't going to do too much. I had left her at the altar with no repercussion, and I strongly feel she was going to pull the same stunt on David, so I had to test her out. As David, I agreed to us dating and entering into an exclusive relationship. This was how I was going to test her. A year has gone by and I decided to come back into my ex-fiancée's life, but not as the boyfriend she claimed to love, but as the groom that had jilted her at the altar. My true self. I couldn't believe my mind could be as twisted as this. Well, I couldn't have acquired so many shares in top companies without being smart. And like I said, I like to be ahead of my peers. My mind had been sharpened from an early age. I sent a text to my ex-fiancée and asked that we meet up in our usual cafe. I got there early, ahead of the scheduled time, so I would be able to see the reaction on her face when she walked in. This way, she didn't have the chance to hide the expression on her face when she saw me. And, you wouldn't guess it, Redditors, her experience was one for the books when she walked into the cafe and saw me. It was pure shock before she hid her emotions. She had thought I was done with her. She didn't know the game was just beginning with me, and I intended to have my fun. We talked, asking each other how we've been for the past year, and I once again asked her if there was anyone in her life at the moment, and of course she lied once again. At the moment, I began thinking if she could easily slip out lies like that, it meant she had been lying to me throughout our whole relationship. Then I dropped the bomb. I told her I wanted to go ahead with the wedding. I had shocked my ex-fiancée twice within an hour. But she didn't refuse my proposal. She had even looked excited at the idea of being a bride again. She was so predictable. The little witch was as predictable as they come, and I was sick of it. My plan was falling into place, Redditors. She had fallen for the trap, and I wasn't going to hold back in showing her people how she had been while we were engaged to be married. And this time she was doing it again. I told you all she wasn't going to change if she wasn't called out or taught a lesson. This was someone that had confessed her love to David before meeting with me, and she was accepting to wear my ring again. Trying to dupe the two of us at the same time once again. Do you guys know she even had the audacity to ask me why I had left her at the altar? She had the mind to ask why I didn't want to marry her then, and now I wanted to marry her. The way she put it, like she thought I was mad, but at least I wanted her in my madness. She probably thought she was so likable that I came back begging after a year later. I didn't deem her worthy of a response. She could think whatever she wanted. Well, we began planning the wedding. I told her it was to be in 2 weeks and she was to plan everything by herself. That was her punishment for leaving me to plan the last wedding. By the end of the 2 weeks, I fixed a meeting as David with her. Our very first meeting to celebrate 9 months of getting to know each other. Throughout the 2 weeks it took to plan another fake wedding, she didn't even show she was in love with another man or she was having conversations with another man. She treated me like an egg, all loving and caring and disgusting. You needed to be there to witness the change in her character. But I knew what was behind the facade. I couldn't be fooled twice. Heck, I couldn't even be fooled once, but I had slipped up and had paid for it. Now it was time for her to pay all she had done. The day of the wedding came and we exchanged our vows in front of the fake priest whom I had hired to oversee the ceremony. I had also faked my signature on the marriage certificate because there was no way I was getting married to the lying witch, not even by mistake. Time for the reception and my wife had suddenly disappeared from her bridal suite. Of course I knew where she was. She was planning on meeting up with David at the very same hotel. I had arranged it so the meeting would happen in the very same place my wedding reception was supposed to be happening. I had even hired a guy to act as David, all to catch her in the act. Everyone began looking for the bride and I got a call that she was in the room. I connected my phone to a projector in the wedding reception hall where our guests were already seated. My ex-fiancee's face came on the screen with the guy I had hired to be David, and her words were loud enough for everyone to hear. She confessed her love to David on screen in front of all the guests we had invited, and I could finally breathe. Everything had come into play. My guests began murmuring immediately and the projector was disconnected. I sent people to go fetch my wife for our reception. The amount of fun I was having, you all needed to see how everything had played out. My ex-fiancée decided to grace the reception hall, not knowing the disgrace she had brought upon herself. Once she entered, I connected my phone to the projector that was supposed to be showing goodwill messages from our friends and family towards our marriage and showed the evidence of her cheating on me before our wedding day. Luckily, I hadn't invited my family to this second disaster of a wedding. It was only my few friends I had invited and left the remainder of the guest list up to her. So the hall was filled to the brim with her people witnessing what a two-timer she was. I decided to replay her conversation in the hotel room with David again, and watched how the color drained from her face with shock. That color was the color of sweet victory. Next time she wasn't going to try to play men, and if she did, her friends would surely call her out on it. One thing was for certain, she wasn't going to be getting married again anytime soon, at least not in front of this crowd that had just witnessed her true colors. Except she moved to a different country. My ex-fiancee's life was totally ruined in front of the people she called her family and friends. I took the fake wedding certificate and tore it in front of her. I walked up to her and showed her the chats. I showed her that I was the Dave she was supposed to meet at the hotel room. I even showed her the recent texts of her telling me to wait until later that night before we could meet. I wondered how she had planned to sneak out of the house on our wedding night when she had sent the text. But I guess nothing could ever stop a two-timer from showing her ways. However, I had dealt her a big lesson that she was surely not going to forget in a long time. If she was, and I hope she was going to stop playing mind games with people. After that day, I never heard from my ex-fiancée again, and I was happy and content that I had played the player. Hey Redditors, I hope you've gotten to learn a thing or two from my experience. I know some of you would think I had gone a little too extreme in dealing with my ex-fiancée, but I have come across people like her more than once or twice in my lifetime. These category of people won't stop until they've been dealt a harsh blow that throws them back into reality. My ex-fiancée thought she was sleek and smart so she could play mind games with anyone. The lesson would serve as a reminder anytime she wants to try it again. Plus, I am now happy with myself from removing myself from her evil claws. It hadn't been a fun experience knowing I was being played for a fool by someone I wanted to marry, but now the experience has made me more self-aware when it comes to dealing with people, male or female. Thank you for sharing in my experience, and I really hope this doesn't happen to you too. Have a lovely day, Redditors. My wife began acting strange once we marked our 5-year anniversary, and I knew something was up. She began making shady movements and staying up late to text on the phone with her lights dimmed low. I know you all must be thinking there's nothing wrong with staying up a little late and texting on the phone. It might probably be the girls' group chat, Maybe they're planning a hangout or something. I thought that was maybe it. Lol. I thought there wasn't a lot to it. Label me stupid, right? Well, I've been called stupid in different ways when it comes to my wife. I relayed my worries to my friends, and they all thought I was being paranoid over a few nights of staying up late and receiving text messages. But after various nights of watching her while pretending to sleep, I knew it wasn't just my paranoia. At first, she tried to be discreet with it, of course, but I haven't been fooled ever since I left high school. She would sneak into the bathroom and stay there for hours and sneak back in as the day was about to break. My fellow Redditors, you all don't think that was my paranoia playing a role, right? Well, before you judge me, I decided to test if it was a fluke. I became extra nice. Attention to details and all the stuff ladies seem to love. It was all part of a scheme to know if I was imagining things. Far be it from me to ask her and have her lie to my face, so I planned a trip. It was our 5-year anniversary after all, and I'm sure you all will agree with me that this was the perfect way to watch her without raising suspicions. It was a weekend getaway, and we had to do everything together. So if she's acting up or strange, I would see it clearly, and I would know. As you have it, my friends on here, I took my wife on the weekend getaway, and my suspicions were confirmed. My wife was indeed hiding something with how strange she was acting. It began when we were shown into our luxurious hotel room in the Pacific Northwest, and she had dropped her phone to go freshen up. Can you imagine the way she had run to it at the sound of a text message notification? It was like she was trapped in the Sahara Desert and her phone was the only source of water. I kid you not. I watched her grab the phone and dash back into the bathroom, and I couldn't do anything but stare in disbelief. The next incident happened when we went out to grab the romantic candlelight dinner the hotel offered as part of the itinerary for our trip. All through the dinner, the text messages were frequent based on how late the dinner was. It was her usual texting time with whoever she was on the phone with. So I did the brave thing and asked what the messages were all about and got slapped in the face with a lie. Did she actually expect to believe it was the girls' group chat that texted her constantly? And what happened to trying to find time for your husband during your anniversary getaway? I let that slide too because, as I said, I didn't want to raise suspicions, just gather enough evidence to know I wasn't paranoid. Throughout the weekend, my wife was glued to her phone like a magnet. Nothing could come between. At this point, she was rubbing it in my face that I was a fool, so I laid the last trap. I booked an all-night spa for her, the whole massages, oils, and whatnot. My plan, you may ask? Well, she couldn't be getting a body massage and texting. That's when I planned to strike. I had agreed with the masseuse, going so far as paying them a little tip for them to slip me my wife's phone when she came in for the massage. Color me shamed, but I was going mad with the act and I needed to know. If you all were in my shoes, I'm pretty sure you would have all resorted to measures way worse than this. I know you're wondering how I planned to unlock the phone once I got it, but if you know my wife as much as I do, she wasn't really the smartest one in the box. It was either going to be her birthday or something along the lines of an important event date. I waited just outside the door as her massage date began. True to their word, the masseuse brought out the phone and handed it to me a little later just as another text came in. Turns out I didn't need to unlock it. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you already know who it was, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw on the pop-up screen. It was a text, of course. My wife and her lover were predictable maniacs, but the context of the text was what sent me reeling. It turned out I wasn't paranoid at all. My wife of 5 years was having an affair outside our marriage, and she and her lover were getting ready to serve me divorce papers from all indications of the message. What else could? I can't wait for you to leave him mean. 5 years went down the drain just like that. Although ours wasn't the best of marriages, I don't believe in love and all its excesses, but I tried. I did try to make it work, but it seems I was too weird that my wife didn't even have the audacity to look me in the face and tell me she's done. She had to sneak around with an unknown person through late-night texts. That was pathetic, and I'm sure you all would agree with me. I was about to hand the phone back to the masseuse when it pinged again, and this time it was text containing some sort of prenup document from her lawyer. Prenup. I don't recall signing a prenuptial agreement before we got married. I can't let her spring this up on me, so I decided to do the first thing that came to mind once I got back from this. My marriage was a mess ever since my wife and I exchanged vows on the makeshift altar in front of a rented pasture 5 years. Let me give you a little backstory on how we all ended up here. My name is Keyshawn, and I'm 30 years old. My wife's name is Alice, and she's 28 years old. We met at a friend's wedding party, and she had everything I liked in a lady. Long legs, killer hair, the whole razzle-dazzle. Sadly, she didn't have this great qualities in IQ, but I was intrigued at the moment about her. We got introduced by the couple who we were both distant friends of, and we hit off. Partly because of my curiosity and the fact that she ticked every box in what I wanted my woman to be made of physically. As we started hanging out, I had told her I didn't believe in love and romance and all those cliches. She seemed to agree with me too. Now that I think about it, she always seemed to agree to what I was saying all the time back then. I found out she attended Dartmouth College and was in her final year. At the time, I had already graduated and was working in a startup company in Seattle that paid well. The relationship began on a rocky start because I couldn't see her all the time. Well, rocky for her because she complained numerous times, but I didn't. I felt we had the same interests, so feelings weren't a factor where we were concerned. That wasn't a problem, as I pointed out. My wife and I saw each other when we saw each other, and a year later I proposed. No, I didn't have feelings for her when I proposed. It felt like a partnership, and of course she agreed. She didn't have feelings for me, I think, but we had mutual respect for each other. My friends all thought I was crazy for marrying a woman. I had no feeling for her, but my wife understood and agreed with me on every take. That's basically what every man would want. At the time, I didn't consider her capable of having an affair. To pull that off, you'd have to be smart, and my wife definitely wasn't up there with the word. I should have considered it, of course, that she'll be able to do something like that, but she hadn't seemed to be complaining throughout our 5 years of marriage. The sex was okay. She didn't want kids. I provided for her. I really couldn't see what else was wrong. I mean, she agreed with everything I said, so I thought she might have wanted it too. Could I have possibly been wrong? My friends had warned me earlier, as I had pointed out, but I hadn't given their warning much thought considering they were all love-whipped. Okay, I'll admit one of the reasons I had been pushed to get married was because they were all doing it, and I hated to be the one left out. Like everywhere I looked back then, one of my guys was getting hitched. I didn't want to be the one left because I had thought love was a fluke, so I got married to my wife. I thought long-term, of course, but long-term for me. My wife was pretty with a face that made a lot of women jealous for days, and I was pretty easy on the eyes too. I was content with that. She seemed to be content too. Heck, I still remember one particular party we attended as a couple in her university days. I was receiving the jealous stare from men, and all the women were giving my wife the death stare because they felt she had bagged a catch. I was the catch. We were a power couple, and she held her head a little higher as we mingled around her friends. She had laughed and clung to my arm all night while smirking and acting proud. That night we talked about our future, and she had once again agreed with everything I had laid out about what I wanted. That was the night we also agreed to get married, and I proposed to her. Although we didn't see each other every time while we were dating, I knew she was perfect for me, and we could make it work. Shortly after, we were wed in a not-so-fancy ceremony, and she didn't complain once. It was just a small gathering of my family and friends with hers. Well, it was mostly her friends. Her parents were terribly against our marriage. 1 year of wedding bliss, 2 years, 3 years, 4 and 5, not one single day of complaint. We made it work together. It seemed like we made it work together in my head, or maybe that was just my paranoia speaking. Lol, I've been paranoid for 5 years that I was doing right by my wife. What exactly would make a woman wake up 5 years later and start consulting her lawyer about prenups if she didn't seem content? What made a woman start laughing at around midnight to her anonymous lover right beside her husband on their matrimonial bed? What I didn't know, my fellow Redditors, was that she wasn't going to be content, and now she was digging up a prenup. A prenup? She wanted to rob me of half of my property with her lover and expect me not to retaliate. That wasn't going to happen on my watch. She must have thought I was easy to fool. Well, she had something coming for her. The first thing I did once we got back from our trip was to hire a private investigator. The PI came highly skilled and recommended by the site I had picked him from. I hoped he could get to the bottom of this. Why my wife wanted a prenup, and who this mystery lover was. His job was just to shadow my wife and dig into her life and find out what she was hiding. I couldn't just walk up to her lawyer and demand answers because that would result in betrayal of the client's confidentiality. Her lawyer might be in on the scam that was about to come into play here. I didn't tell any of our friends that I had hired a PI because someone could be in on it with her, and almost half of my friends thought our marriage was going well, just like I had thought. The irony. I handed the PI everything I knew on my wife, where she worked, her daily routine, her friends and family contact list. If I knew my wife at all, the information I had handed to him would be correct. Of course I had thought they would be correct. I had been married to the woman for 5 years. We had lived together. You guys won't believe the information my PI handed over to me 2 days after he started monitoring my wife. It turned out my wife wasn't really my wife. Yes, you read right, my marriage to my wife was null and void. My wife was already married. She was married. Can you believe that twisted piece of information? Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. I couldn't believe it at all. The woman I had said "I do" at the altar in front of my family and friends was married to another man. How, you may be asking? That was the question I had asked myself when the PI had broken the news to me. She was married when we were dating. She was already married in her 2nd year of college, and she had said "I do" to me knowing she already bore another man's name. Unbelievable. How had I never suspected a thing? My fellow Redditors, my wife was truly married. The PI had said there were no records of her ever getting a divorce, no records of a judge annulling her marriage even if it was a fake one. She had lived with me for 5 years. I began wondering about so many things all at once. No wonder she didn't protest getting married after a year of dating. Now that I think of it, she seemed eager to get married almost immediately, playing the demure girlfriend. No wonder her parents hadn't graced our wedding. They had been aware of the sham their daughter was pulling. And like a fool, I had married a scammer, all because I didn't want to be the one left out of all my friends. Lol, I had been a big-time fool, all right. A total idiot because I had just been outsmarted by my wife. Could I even call her that? It had all been a sham. If I had been told somewhere not too long ago that I'll be a victim of a sham, I would have laughed, knowing there was no possible way someone could outsmart me like that. I mean, this is the stuff I see in the movies and shake my head at what a slob the actors were that they had fallen prey to. But this is real life, folks, and I had fallen prey. I had married a married woman, lol. I didn't even know what to think except the fact that I was being played, either by my wife and her husband or my wife and her lover. That was probably who she had been texting all this while, right under my nose. And I had no clue. I hadn't even seen any signs. But they had been so clear to see. I lived with a woman I had no feelings for and knew next to nothing about. I had never seen her parents or siblings or any of her childhood friends even once. I hadn't even bumped into them per chance. My wife had been so perfectly mysterious and I had been so careless and self-centered that I didn't know I had been eating right into her hand. I kept the information to myself, waiting for the perfect time to strike her with it. Unknown to her that I had found out her huge secret, she still kept going on about her day like always. Acting strange, being less touchy-feely, constantly texting on the phone. However, I had caught up with her sham. All those things now had a reason. She wasn't truly married to me. The PI dropped information on her husband the next day, and all I could do was regret not hiring the guy sooner, maybe even before I had gotten married, to prevent myself from this embarrassment. This was a first-hand embarrassment that if any of my friends were to find out, I would become a laughingstock. I just posted this on here because I needed someone to vent to. Apparently, the guy my wife was married to was a low-bum financial analyst who had graduated from the same college as her. The two lovebirds had even attended the same high school and had gotten married when my wife was in 2nd year. However, at the moment of the PI dropping that bomb, I still didn't know why and what this had to do with my wife wanting a prenup. I admit I knew the why and how, but what I was looking for was how she intended to use it against me. Before our marriage, we had never signed a prenuptial agreement, so I was wondering she was going to hold me to one. Fortunately for me, my marriage to my wife was a sham, so it wasn't going to hold to court. It was funny if she actually thought it would come to that I would allow her get away with tricking. So of course I planned out my revenge while waiting for my PI to get back to me. I got in contact with my lawyer and found out that my wife could get arrested for bigamy and face 5 years imprisonment or dole out $100,000. But I needed to make sure that there was no evidence of her ever being divorced or a judge signing their wedding annulment papers. I made sure of that with my PI when he got back to me on my wife's dealings with the prenup. My fellow Redditors, you wouldn't believe the information my PI came to me with this time. Apparently, my wife's lawyer was in on the scam with her. They had planned to lift my signature from one of my work documents and place on the prenup. Their plan was while I was being busted up by the whole serving of divorce papers that I wouldn't see it coming when they slammed the prenup in my face in court. Can you imagine that? They all thought I was eating out of my wife's hand, so the whole divorce thing will unsettle me and then they'll present the prenup in court. Did she really think I was that stupid? I mean, I was actually giving her credit for fooling me into marriage, but this was pure comedy. They had all planned this? A bunch of working brains had planned this. I was disappointed. Very much so. I had graduated top of my class in mathematics and statistical studies. My professors had termed me a genius. Ever since I had left high school, everything I had done was always based on facts and not feeling. In college, I was a well-oiled machine and a monster according to the girls I had dated. You couldn't fool, as I could sniff out lies within a second. Most of the girlfriends I had in college couldn't keep up with me, and you could never say you had outsmarted me. There was an instance when my college girlfriend tried to gaslight me into believing I was the one cheating on her when she was the one being funny with my friends. I cleared her before she even realized what was going on in her life. I didn't like looking like a fool, and what my wife us just done was similar to making me look like one. Anyway, I told my PI to make sure there was no trace of my wife's divorce papers lying around and got to work with my lawyer. Before my wife was going to serve me divorce papers, I was going to surprise her first, so I sued her for bigamy, fraud, and infringement. At least she would be facing 7 years jail time with this or coming up with $500,000 bail. That would teach her not to mess with me. I decided I was going to break the news to her and call her out on her charade before she had the chance to think she had an upper advantage on me. No one does that. Not knowing her whereabouts, I asked the PI to find out where she was at the moment, and I got the information that my wife was last seen entering a hotel with her husband. They had been sneaking around under my nose. I stormed into the hotel and asked for her room number and began causing a havoc when they refused to release it due to clients' privacy. I threatened to write tons of bad reviews about the hotel and publish it on various high-grossing sites. The manager had to come down when the staff informed him of the commotion I was causing and took me to his office to talk. I explained my situation to him, and he took pity on me, which I hated, by the way. But it was a means to an end, so I shut up and let him lead me to the elevator. I followed his lead as he hands me the key card once we got to a hallway on the 3rd floor and informed me he had no in this. My fellow Redditors, I unlocked the door, and as you'd have guessed it, my wife was mid-coitus position with her husband. The shock on her face when she saw me was enough for all the stress I've been through ever since finding out that we weren't truly married. I smiled and threw the papers in her face that my lawyer had drafted up, including the divorce papers she so desperately wanted. I had decided that the best way to settle this was in court and I was going to make them pay. As I walked out, she was following at my back and hollering at me to stop. Well, that was her own business because it was more embarrassment on herself and person. There was a lot of people watching her as she ran after me as I exited the hotel lobby, her face still covered in shock and the hotel sheet wrapped around her chest. I got back home and sent a text to my friends arranging for a party to celebrate our anniversary with them. The plans of revenge I had for this woman was just getting started. The party kicked off and my wife was writhing her hands together in the corner while I mingled among my friends. Lowell, my smile was irreplaceable. I had told my PI to find the location of my wife's husband and had sent thugs to get him. They didn't know what was coming for them, and this was the best way to introduce my wife and her bigamy. And I'm sure you guys are thrilled at the course this was taking. As the party progressed, I got the call that the surprise of the party had arrived. I took my wife to center of our living room and tapped my champagne glass to get the attention of our guest. I gave a speech with a malicious grin on my face as my wife fidgeted by my side and broke the news to my friends. The loud gasps was what made me smile, and my thugs brought out the other man in my marriage. The irony of life was so funny as all eyes was on my wife and the man in my living room. I raised my glass and toasted to their success and started a round of applause to celebrate their marriage anniversary. The next day, my wife moved out without saying a word to me after I had planned to confront her. On that same day, I got a text to notify me of a meeting set between our two parties to sit and negotiate about the divorce. The meeting was already underway, and everything my private investigator had told me was in accordance to what my wife's lawyer had for me. They even still had the audacity to show me the prenup papers with my lifted signature on it. It was unbelievable that their sense was so scanty that they could serve me prenup papers when, first of all, our marriage was not legal. I was perplexed if people like my wife's lawyer was the set of people that presented cases to the court. The court of law couldn't be as stupid. Could it? Firstly, my marriage was illegal. Secondly, my wife lifted or could have even forged my signature. And I'm sure you all are dying to hear what I found hilarious in all this. The fact that they thought they could pull it through. My intelligence was deeply insulted. The meeting continued till late with us coming at a stalemate end, mostly because of me. I didn't plan on letting my wife get away with trying to dupe me. My lawyer fixed the court date 2 days after our meeting to try to come to an agreement. I rose as the court began its proceedings, not caring much for the court process, just what will be the end point. However, my fellow Redditors, my wife had a lot of surprises under her sleeve for this court process. She disproved the fact that she was married with an annulment certificate from 2 months after we started dating. My wife claimed that her first marriage was a scam, and since she hadn't consummated it, she thought it didn't stand ground, most especially after her divorce. Like I had mentioned somewhere in the beginning of my narration, my wife wasn't the smartest person on the block. Since when did non-consummation of a marriage mean the marriage didn't hold ground? She sounded like she was living in the 16th century. I mean, she was seriously embarrassing herself in front of people she didn't know, and the court. Well, that was nothing new for her. Moreover, they had consummated the marriage all right. That's what they had been doing when I had caught them that day. The court took the marriage annulment certificate from her to check its validity, and of course they found it non-existent. There was no record of her being divorced. Lowell, she then resorted to hysterics, claiming that she had watched her husband die, and so she didn't give much thought into questioning if the certificate was valid. This was also the reason she got married again. As you guessed it, her claim was disputed by my lawyer with a footage of her and her husband leaving a hotel together hand in hand. This time, her lawyer didn't waste a second before coming up with a counterclaim that she recently discovered he had survived whatever accident, and she was meeting up with him for the first time. The amount of lies that was thrown around by wife and her lawyer in argument to the charge of bigamy against her was a sight to behold. They had even produced records of her husband's accident and a document that had pronounced him dead. The document had come up as valid, and I was shocked that they had been able to pull a fake document. I was convinced it wasn't even the man's true death certificate and that they had managed to tweak it. I was so shocked at the turn the court was taken. I couldn't believe the court that validates all truth could believe a cheap lie like that. My hatred doubled for my wife then, that she had managed to outsmart the court of law and the people presiding over it. My hatred for my wife began, as you all already know, when she showed she could outsmart me by being married to another man already. I never knew I could hate someone as deep as how I hated her, and now this. It was like I didn't know the woman seated opposite me, like her true personality had shown up overnight, and I was in shock at the easy way she came up with the lies. It was ironic that she was literally the one telling her lawyer what to say before the judge. I kid you not. In fact, at that very moment, my anger and hatred tripled. I had been living with a stranger under the same roof for over 5 years and breathing in the same air. She had been holding the full capacity of her brain back from me, agreeing with me and putting up with me looking down on her so she and her husband could dupe me of my money. This whole thing was partly my fault. At least I admit that to myself, my fellow Redditors. I had seen the shallow side of my wife and thought that she would do for me. And the fact that I didn't want to be left behind amongst my friends, so I married the first person that ticked all my boxes and didn't do a proper getting to know her. The court had been adjourned a day later, and we reconvened back on that day for the second charge on my wife, fraud. She had claimed I signed the prenup papers, whereas I claimed she and her lawyer had arranged and lifted my signature from a work document. I leave many work documents at home, so lifting my signature wouldn't be too hard with the right skilled person. My lawyer presented the facts before the judge in turn, questioning my wife on how I had signed a prenup then, but now I couldn't remember it. Then the strings of lies began. She claimed I was drunk when I had signed them. Drunk? Me? Now I confirmed she didn't know me at all because there was no way under the clouds of the sky that I had signed some papers while I was under the influence of alcohol. I had never drank alcohol up to the point of getting tipsy or drunk from it ever since the accident that had almost taken my life. The accident had happened on the second week of my second semester in college. There had been a party being thrown by the senior colleagues who were to be graduating that semester, and I was done with all I had planned out on my list. So I talked myself into going to make friends or just have a good time. That was the first time of me ever attending a party. I got there and the party was already raving. At the door, I was handed a drink, and I don't the amount of alcohol that was put inside that cup, but from there I lost all control of my senses. I threw back more drinks than I could count, and from the party got really lit for me. Safe to say, I embarrassed myself in front of various people, most seniors especially. However, that's not what made me stop getting drugged. I was robbed and beaten senseless that night because I didn't have a sense of direction, and I bumped into a group of bad people. From that day, I promised myself I was never getting drunk again, so my wife's claim didn't hold. My lawyer disputed her claim that I was drunk when I signed the prenup with evidence of how the signature looked straight and not muddy, like how a drunk person would have signed it. That didn't deter my wife one bit, as she was overly eager of splitting my property along with this divorce. Property she hadn't worked for, mind you. Well, you could say she worked for it by putting up with me for 5 years to be able to achieve her goal. My disbelief, shock, anger, and hatred had mixed together at this point. This was premium stuff that only happens in the movies, and I lived it. Like I said, she really refused to give up, hence increasing what was supposed to be a small case. Redditors on this platform wouldn't guess the new case she presented to the court. Abuse. My wife accused me of emotionally and verbally abusing her. What evidence did she have, you may be wondering? She and her lawyer had tweaked a video of me shouting at one of my contractors on my estate and presented to the court as evidence of me abusing. At that point, it was obvious they were grasping for straws, and the judge had already concluded her judgment, but for the sake of laughs, needed to listen to them. It was hilarious, and I know you all would find it so. My lawyer quickly disproved the claim that showed it was my contractor I had raised my voice at on the phone. The court went on a break, and we reconvened back in an hour to hear what the judge had decided on our case. Revenge was really a dish served cold because what my wife planned for me was handed back to her tenfold. She was found guilty of 2 charges, bigamy and fraud. The court set her bail at $200,000 with 3 weeks of community service. Her jail time was set to 5 years imprisonment if she couldn't meet bail, and I went home a happy man with my money, property, and peace of mind intact. 2 days later, my wife and her lawyer delivered the divorce paperwork to me, and I happily signed, knowing I had managed to escape a terrible scenario. There was no point in signing the divorce papers, but I wanted it to be on record that my wife and I had nothing else to do with each other, even if we weren't truly married in the first place. I wondered what would be going through her mind now that her plan had failed. There were still some questions I would have loved to ask her, but that hatred still burned strong in my heart, and I was just happy I never had to deal with her again. My fellow Redditors, I'm sure you all will be going home with a lesson or two from my experience. I really hoped you learned something from the terrible experience I had with the woman I had thought I had married. Try not to be like me that thought all these stuffs only happen in movies, and always keep an eye out on the people you call your closest. There are a lot of things to be wary about all the time. Stay alert, and until next time, my friends, thank you for reading my experience.